welcome to the Center about Political and Development Studies. Before we introduce our main speaker today, I would like to introduce the format of our session. Our session will start with the main speaker, Rana, and then we will take for 30 minutes, and then we will take 30 minutes for the Q&A, answers and questions. My friend and colleague Yusuf will moderate this session. So let's start. Rana, born in Khan Yunis, Palestinian writer. She specializes in English language. Born in Cairo, living in Khan Yunis. English language training, testing, and translation. Working with young people has given her the chance to understand their dreams and the energy that lies within. She sees her job as a chance to instill hope and motivation in their lives so they may take towards accomplishing their dreams. Rana lived through all turbulences and major events which took place in her country. The intelligent youth of Gaza preserving under the siege and the widows who struggle to care for the children have all inspired her to tell the world this story. Rana currently lives in Gaza with her family and has lived a part of her life in the USA. Her book, In Gaza, I Dare to Dream, received favorable views from prominent intellectuals and writers like Professor Norman Finkelstein, Danny Former, and others. In Gaza, I Dare to Dream, Rana vividly recounts details of her own life under Israeli occupation and aggression against the Gazan population. The daily suffering of the Palestinian people is seldom mentioned in the mainstream media. Therefore, the author takes you on a journey to one of the most violent parts of the Middle East to tell you the story of the ordinary people of Gaza. Gaza, land where joy and grief are acquainted, yet its people dare to dream, dare to love, and struggle to gain their basic human rights. Now I'll let you go.
Thank you all for coming. And today I'm just going to talk about my journey towards publishing my book and how I began this journey and how this idea came into my head and what were the main obstacles which were in my way when I tried to accomplish my goal here, living here in Gaza like the rest of you. Although Ahmed, yes, he said that I'll live part of my life outside in the States, but that was when I was a child and teenager. But for the past 20 years or so, I have been living here under the siege. So how did I achieve this major accomplishment in my life? The reason I'm happy to be here to talk about this is that I want to encourage the young people like you that whatever dream you have, even if you're living here under the siege and under occupation, you can still achieve those dreams if you have the faith in yourself and your abilities. So my writing journey started when I was a child. Actually, I was what you would call a bookworm. I used to love reading all the time, and when I grew up, reading and books were the major source of entertainment. And so I would actually save my money to go buy some books from the bookstore. I used to spend lots of time reading in the school library at lunchtime, and I actually read, whenever I had a free moment, like doing the laundry or maybe going to the roof of the house. I read mostly young adult fiction books, and which were very interesting. And the one I remember the most was stories written by Tom Sawyer, the American author. And my teacher she encouraged me to read by telling me that for every story or book I read, I had to present a report about this book that I wrote. So along came with this passion for reading. I discovered my passion for writing, and I started writing at an early age, at maybe 12 years old. I remember that I used to write letters to my friends, and in class we would pass notes to each other. I would also write some poetry, and every day I wrote in my diary. I had a number of safely locked diaries, and I would write at the end of every day. When I came back to Gaza, I had a journal, which was like a notebook, and I wrote in every day, but I kept it to myself. Nobody really cared about writing when I came back. I mean, and in one of my writing classes at the university here, I mentioned this in my book actually, that I voluntarily wrote a journal for the writing class. And then when I showed it to my teacher, he was just, I don't know, he didn't really acknowledge what I did. And he just said, yeah, okay, you know how teachers are here. They don't really, they just care about their job, I guess. So a few years back, I set up a blog, and I started writing in my blog. But that really didn't get me far. I mean, it wasn't very famous, and I didn't feel like anybody was reading that blog, because you have to do some marketing for yourself in order for the people to read your blog. So then I gave up. I mean, I just completely lost interest in my blog. And then I decided that I started writing on a couple of websites. My teacher, Professor Habib, one day told me to write an article on women living in Gaza after the 2006 elections. And this article was going to be published in opendemocracy.net. So I wrote the article, and then after that, it just stopped there. I thought this was the beginning of something, but then it just, it didn't get me far. I wrote on a couple of websites, or mainly one actually, but then I quit. So what did I do next? One day my sister who was living in the States back then, Dr. Riham, she called me and she said she was following my articles that I wrote, and she said, you are wasting your energy. Why are you writing here and there? Why don't you just compile them and write a good book? Because anybody here in the States, she said, anybody writes a book, and it could be sometimes just nonsense. But you have a message in your writing, and so why don't you just start compiling these good articles and write a book? So I really wasn't thinking of that before, and I keep telling her that, thank you for giving me this idea, because I thought it was just something impossible to be an author. So I just felt this need that I needed to get my voice out to the world, like the young people here, because we know that most of the mainstream media is a total blackout. It blocks out the true stories of the people that are living here. Nobody knows what's going on in Gaza. I mean, only people who are interested in our life, which are just ordinary people like us, or activists who try to follow up our news. And the public, the common people, the ordinary people know nothing about Gaza. And I discovered this actually when I started to, in my publishing journey, and as I will show you towards the end of my presentation, that some of the people I worked with, my editors and my cover designer, they were actually very moved and touched by my writing, and they said that we don't know that this happens in your part of the world. So my stories that I wrote were just human stories. I'm not really a reporter or a journalist, so I just wrote stories about the common, ordinary Palestinian person who is living here in Gaza, and what this person goes through every day. So I wrote, they were like short diary entries And I wrote about being a mother, being a wife, a student, and just a normal Palestinian living here under the siege. This is a glimpse of my notebook, one of my notebooks. Yeah, I used to write every day in my notebook. That's before I typed them into my laptop. And this entry here is one of the entries in the book. If you look closely, you'll see that it's December 13th, 2010. And here is one dating to September 20th, 2012. So these are just a few of my entries and what they looked like before I wrote them, before they were published. So my book, In Gaza, I Dare to Dream, it's a memoir style. It's like reading a personal diary. The entries are not very long. You have samples from the book here, which the guys have generously copied for you. I chose this style because I wanted to make it easy for the readers, and because I felt that I could relate more to the people who were reading this type of material if it was in this style. My book consists of 3 parts. Each part is made of entries written in chronological order. The entries start from 2008 till 2016. The main stories in the book include the major events which we all lived through here in Gaza. They talk about life under the siege, the Israeli attacks on Gaza, 2008, 12, and 14. I wrote lengthy entries about the impact of the siege on the children of Gaza, on the people who were waiting to get treatment to travel outside, and how they died while waiting for the treatment. Students who wanted to travel outside to study, raising children under the siege, and how they ask you all sorts of questions, and they like, why can't we go outside? Why can't we visit Jerusalem? All of these things are some of the topics of my book. I also wrote about the lack of places to go here for recreation, the education system. It's not a research or anything, but from my experience as a student and as a mother with my children in school, and I just pointed out some of the flaws of how the education system here is in Gaza, and how this was actually was affected by the occupation. For instance, I talked about when I came back from the United States, I was in 10th grade, and it was the first Intifada back then, and how we were mostly out of school. Most of the school year, it was either strikes or just long days without going to school, and it was really there wasn't really much education during that year, I remember. So the first part of the book is entitled Me, My, Gaza, and I. This is an introduction to it. And some of the entries, here are some of the entries. You have one of the entries on the table there. It's called, the first one I started with was moving back from the USA to Gaza. And I talked about mainly major events which happened back then when I came. It was 1990, and it was the first Intifada, and some of the things that I witnessed, and started comparing between my life here and my life back there, and how I came back to an occupied country. There are also entries about Jerusalem, because I had a chance to visit Jerusalem once, which was in 2000. And I talked a lot about the power cuts. So this entry here titled the damn power generators, and talked about some of the accidents which took place here in Gaza because of the power cuts, and how many lives were taken because of these accidents, where people, where children died because of lighting a candle or any electricity related accidents that took place. My grandfather's lost finger is also an entry which I wrote about how when I was a child, my grandfather lost his finger as he was shot. He was shot at when he was on the roof of the house, and actually the soldiers were aiming to shoot him in the head, but then they missed, and he had this missing finger all the time. And as a child, I was always looking at his hand, and when I asked my mother what happened to him, and she said that he got shot by the Israelis. So this was always there was always a fear inside me as a child that this was an evidence that there is something to fear. The stark evidence in front of you that this is what happened to my grandfather, and they tried to kill him. There's also an entry about sonic booms, if you remember back in 2006. The post-Shalit deal. That the Israeli sonic booms, which were actually worse than the shelling itself, because suddenly you just hear these booms everywhere, and then glass shatters, and it's really very loud, and it was devastating to me because that year exactly I had given birth to my babies who were triplets, and it was very scary because I tried to protect them from this horrible sound, and I mentioned in this entry that I tried to stuff their ears with cotton. I remember in the middle of the night, to try to protect them from this sound. I also talked about the Palestinian prisoners, the heroes behind bars. I have 2 entries which talk about this issue, and how they are forgotten. Nobody knows about them. And if you ask the world, when I wrote this entry, I wrote something about if you ask the world to name a prisoner in our country, they would only know the name of Shalit, because he was making big headlines. But we had 7,000 or over 7,000 prisoners who nobody talks about and nobody rarely mentions in the media, and many of them were children, and they're just living there, and some of them are dying in the prisons and the cells, and nobody really cares about them. The second part of my book is called From the Eyes of a Child, and I wrote a couple of entries about the world of children, and I mainly got the inspiration from my own children and the children I meet, my friends' kids, my nephews, nieces, and how just living under the sea affects their lives, and the questions that they ask that sometimes you can't find an answer to, and how they seem so mature, more mature than than other kids around the world. So, for example, I mentioned my son when he asked me about his grandfather who had died, and he said to me, "Who shelled him?" So he just imagined that people who die are constantly just being shelled by the Israeli occupation. And one day he was fighting with his sister, and because they were keeping up with the news that I watch, and I didn't really realize that they were actually paying attention to the news that I was watching as a grown-up. And it was in 2012 when the Libyan revolution broke out. And so they were fighting one day, and he called his sister. They were calling each other names, and he called his sister a Gaddafi. He thought, it's like this monster that he sees on television. So this really opened my eye that children are very inquisitive, and they pay attention to the world of grown-ups. So some of the entries in this part are a trip to the roof. One day I took them to the roof, and there were drones all over the place, and what happened at that time. And there was also another entry named The Swing. And the last entry, which is actually very recent, I wrote in 2016. It was one day when my 2 daughters were quarreling. One was saying that I overheard them. They were in their bedroom, and one of them was saying, "We live in Gaza," and the other one was saying, "No, we live in Palestine." So one of them came to me. She said, "Do we live in Gaza or Palestine?" So I mean, it's not, I didn't laugh, it wasn't a funny question, because I just thought how sad that these children don't even know their country, and they take national studies at schools, but that really doesn't help them very much, because they just see dull pictures in books, and this really doesn't communicate to them much about the Palestinian cities. And so I Googled, on YouTube, I Googled something, a short documentary about Palestine, and I started to show her and said, here, this is our country, it's beautiful and it's full of beautiful places, but we can't go, you just have to try to explain to them so they can understand what's going on. And we can't go there because there's occupation, but I told them about my trip in 2000 and of the things that I saw when I went to Jerusalem. The last part is about other stories. It's mainly 3 stories about other people I wrote about. One of them is about 2 people, Hala and Saleh. These are not the real names, but she is my cousin, and her husband was killed in the 2014 aggression. And so she wrote me her story, and I just wrote it here. And there's another story, another student from the Islamic University. This is not her real name, of course. And this is a true story of what happened to her during also the 2014 attack. And also a real true story from Khuza'a, and it's very horrifying, because as you read it, you will, I don't know, you just picture that this is some kind of scary movie that you're watching, because of the horrible things that really happened to these people. That's it about my book. These are the 3 main parts.
Where's the book?
Yeah, that's a good question. Where's the book? Yeah, so since I published this book initially on Amazon, it's found on Amazon.com. But soon I am planning to publish it here also in Gaza, inshallah, because I know not everyone can buy it from Amazon and have it delivered from the United States. So I just copied some samples for you to read, and
you can publish it in Goodreads, maybe, or
yeah,
what the link and.
Yeah, but because I have a deal with Amazon, I can't do anything until a certain period of time. So inshallah, I'm going to have it spread on other, published on other websites. If you, I don't know if I have more time, I can talk about the problems that I faced during my publishing journey. Yeah, Yusuf, do I have time? Okay. The main obstacles I faced during my publishing journey was, I could just describe it by, if you look at this picture here, I was completely lost. Here in Gaza, I had this great idea in my mind, but I didn't know where to go, who to turn to, who's going to help me publish my book. I know that people here in Gaza don't publish books, it's very hard. And I also had in mind that I wanted the main audience for my book or the Western audience, because they are the ones that don't know anything about us. They know nothing about Gaza, so I wrote this book for them especially. So it was really a time of confusion, which actually took 4 years for me before I was able to take my first step. Yeah, so I had all the book, I had all these entries in my notebook, and I typed them into my laptop, but then I didn't know where to go. And if you go on the internet, it's the whole, big world, and you just don't know who to turn to. So the first step I made was I tried to email traditional publishing houses, but sadly, this proved to be a complete failure, because I didn't receive any responses from anybody. Whether it was a positive or negative, I received no responses. And although one friend tried to help me, but I also didn't receive responses. So after this long phase ended, I had given up along the way, but then I just kept motivating myself, because nobody around me really motivated me except my family. So one day I surfed the internet and I said I'm gonna self-publish my book. I don't want a publishing house. So these days there's something called indie publishing or self-publishing, where anybody can just write a book and upload it on Amazon and it's published. And I met on the internet a couple of authors who really have made lots of progress using this method by self-publishing their own books. So I booked a Skype session with an author, and he told me what to do. He gave me this guide, step-by-step guide, as to how to approach, where to go first, who to contact. And just happened then after that, I took off from there and I started editing. I contacted an editor and a book designer, and I don't know, it just seemed that things started running smoothly afterwards, because I knew now where I was heading. The things that really, one of the things that helped motivate me in my journey as I was publishing my book was that the people I worked with, like my cover designer, her job was only just to design the cover and the book from the inside. But then one day she sent me a message, and this is the actual message that she sent me, really, it was just beyond her work. And this really made me feel uplifted, and made me feel positive, and that I was really on the right path. And she wrote me this very nice message about how she was really moved by the topic of the book, and that this book carries an important message. And she also told me that it's not very often that she gets to work on meaningful projects. I mean, her job is to design covers and books, but sometimes the books she works with are nothing. They're not really very attractive, or they don't carry a message. But when she wrote me this, it was I really felt motivated to go on with my book. And this is her name, Domini Dragoon. She's from California. And my editor also, her name is Rachel Small. She wrote me this at the beginning of my project when she started working with me. And she said that I found your entries incredibly moving, powerful, and inspiring. These are important stories for people to hear. Your strength and determination radiates from the pages. Growing up in Canada, I often heard news stories about Palestine, but never stories from people who lived there, the real stories. So this really, made me, confirmed my belief that really these people, these ordinary people, know nothing about us. And that it was up to the young people of Gaza to communicate their message to, and their stories to the outside world. And afterwards, the website that I worked with, it's called readzy.com. They told me to write my success story with them, because I worked with them and they helped me find the editor and the cover designer. And I wrote the story. If you're interested, you can find it here. It's called readzy.com. So this website, Readzy, mainly offers services, editing, copy editing. Yeah, okay, so here's my success story. Yes, you can find it here. It's blog.readzy, and it just talks about my experience with them, with this website, and how they helped me publish my book. And so it's live evidence, I guess. That's it. That's all I have about my book. Thank you all for coming, and if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer them.
You for such a commendable effort. I've never published a book by myself, but from my experience with my thesis work, from my master's degree, I would say that's I bet it took a lot of effort, and way to go. The first thing that caught my attention is actually the title, "I Dare to Dream." As a matter of fact, our voice is barely audible in today's media. We're talking about a media that gives more attention to trivial issues like the Brangelina breakup or Kanye West and the Kardashians. On the other hand, we're talking about we're seeing a lot of countries that are suffering from ruthless dictators and horrible natural disasters, and it seems no one, sorry for my language, give a damn. So it's really frustrating. But on the other hand, and through my experience, I just recently received my master's degree from the U.S. So I would tell that there are people who really sympathize with our cause, with the Palestinian cause, and what we are facing, especially here in the Gaza Strip, through the siege and the inhumane treatment. I mean, one of the things that the media machine is using, the Israeli propaganda using, is basically dehumanizing the Palestinians. So it's not only the prisoners that we're talking about, it's not only the POWs or the detainees that are being marginalized. We're talking about the Gaza people themselves. When you say Gaza, when you say Palestine, the first thing that crosses people's minds is a person with a bomber jacket or a person who wants to launch a rocket for no apparent reason. On the other hand, they tend to overlook the fact that we're normal people, that we have normal lives, that we're not different from any average Joe or Jane back in the U.S. and of course the other countries. Also, the other thing is that it's not only confined with the American or the Western world. I mean, I remember I had this encounter with a Saudi guy. He came visiting his son in Saudi or in the U.S. and he asked me the silliest question ever. Probably you were frustrated that your daughters were discussing, are we in Gaza or in Palestine? A man was asking me, which one is in the other? Is Gaza in Palestine or Palestine in Gaza? I swear to God, I'm not making that up. It took me almost 20 minutes using Google Maps just to tell the guy, this is Gaza and this is Palestine and this is what it was and this is how it became. I mean, he's in the same age of my father. I mean, probably at that time people had the Palestinian cause had more momentum than it does now. Yet, this guy was totally ignorant. I would recall looking at his son. His son was, I mean, the disappointment is etched on his face. So it's really bad. But with people with commendable efforts, with great efforts like yours, I bet that we have a better chance to reach out to people, to have our voice heard. And being said, I would like to ask you, I'm sorry for the long intro, I would like to ask you if you're considering to do a book tour or something. I mean, since the book is available abroad, so would you, for example, consider having a tour in the US and Europe or whatnot?
Well, my options are very limited here. I mean, it's not very easy to go out. I mean, if things were easy and the borders was open, I would go out, and I actually still don't have a physical copy of the book till now, and I'm the author here. I have to get it shipped from Gaza, from the U.S. But I mean, people ask me, why don't you do a book event, and do a book signing? So that's why I changed my mind about just publishing on Amazon, and I'm planning to publish here in Gaza and maybe do a book event here in Gaza, inshallah. But if I had the chance to go out, I don't think anybody would say no. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and again, congratulations on such an achievement, and well done.
Thank you.
Okay. I would like to know just if you have a problem, sure you have, especially when you publish your book, what's the best thing to do first, and how can you complete all with all the problems, continue to publish your book?
You mean the problems I had in
You
publishing?
forest,
as well?
yeah. Then how you complete when you have problems and sometimes
Yeah.
maybe you have the spread or like this? How you can
Yeah, it's, you know, it takes a lot
just able?
of emotional energy to just pursue your dreams, and that's why actually before I chose this name, the first name I chose was Human Stories from Gaza, but then afterwards it just seemed too plain. So I just had this sense inside that I wanted to defy the siege, defy these circumstances, and I'm going to name my book I Dare to Dream in Gaza. And I chose this picture of this boy who was smiling because I wanted to give, the reader, the sense that the children here are like other children around the world. They want to be, they like to be happy, they like to play, they like to eat candy and blow balloons. They don't want to go blow themselves up and do suicide bombing or anything like that. And so it takes, I think this was the most strenuous part, that just constantly having to motivate your own self, with no help around you. I mean, I just kept talking to myself, I have to do this. I mean, I can't let all of this go to waste. And I went through 3 aggressions. I mean, I lived through all of these major events, so I have to stay strong. If I survived 3 wars, I mean, I can survive writing a book. So yeah, I mean, you just have to do it. I think just find a good person to talk to, your parents mostly, and family members. Yeah, I mean, family members, they care the most about you, and maybe some good friends. But other than that, nobody really cares about what you want to do in your life, except you. Yeah.
I have a question for you. At the beginning, when you started to talk about your experience in writing and when you start to write, you mentioned that you didn't find readers in order to read the things or your essays that you started to publish for the audience. I have one question for you. Did you started to write in English or in Arabic? This is first. Another thing that I think, if you wanted to write if you start to write in English, you have to know your audience. I think that it's not like Arab world. We know that we have lack of readers here in Gaza. I mean, in Arab world. So we know that there is no leaders comparing with the people in Europe or in other countries out. So you have to know your readers. That's why I think this is the point or the weak point that you didn't find readers. If you write in English, it's for sure that you will find readers who are interested in your blogs and your stories. It's for sure about that. The third question I wanted to know about, now you said that you started to write when you were a child, 11 years old or 12?
Around 12, 17.
Yeah, around the 12 years old. That's really nice, and I love that because you started to write even about, you mentioned your book you choose to read, and your teacher who encouraged you in order to read. That's really, I love it. But I want just to know what do you think now as your experience, you have experience now. I wanted to know, did you find that there is a big changes when you start to write from the beginning about the readers? Did you find that there is increasing of numbers of readers who is interesting to read, or?
Well, this is really the most challenging part. But regarding your first question, I never wrote in Arabic really. I just started to write in English because that part of my life where I started reading and writing, I was living in the U.S. and it was like from 10 to 15 years of age when I was 10, and I came back here when I was 15. So I harbored and this talent. I mean, the reading and writing talent. It was all in English. So when I came back here, I also wrote in English. I never wrote in Arabic. And when I published those articles on the websites, it depends on the website and the number of readers that turn to these websites. And it was good with the websites, but it wasn't really very fulfilling. And when I made my own blog, it was you know, you just have to market yourself, and it's not easy. I mean, even now with this accomplishment now that I've published the book, you still have to market your book, because, you know, people these days, they're not, I mean, the audience who want to read about Gaza, you have to target them, okay? So you have to go to them and find out who these people are to market your book. So I think it's it doesn't come like, it's not like a very, there's no magical wand to, you know, have millions of readers. I think that you just it grows steadily. You have to grow your audience steadily. So I think I'm just taking this step by step now, and hopefully it will be in many hands, inshallah, soon.
Any comment? Okay, at the end of the talk, I would like to thank you all for being here. Thank Rana for her informative talk about her book, and let me take this chance to congratulate her again for publishing her book, and hopefully every single one in this room will be an author of a new book on Palestine and Gaza in the future. Thank you all. And we have a course on feature writing. If you are interested, please leave your name and contact details with Ahmed. Starting from next Wednesday.
When I do make copies here, inshallah, I mean, you can email you or something.